All right. Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to our virtual nonprofit workshop series. My name is Jessica Dolan, and I'm the Assistant Director of Development at the Hartford Public Library. This series is offered as a partnership between Hartford Public Library and not the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving anymore, right? Greater Hartford Gives Foundation. And today's session will be Introduction to Nonprofit Budgeting with Jennifer Hockenhall, and I'm going to turn it over to Lucas.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lucas Codognola. I'm a senior officer here at Greater Hartford Gives Foundation, formerly known as Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. As you may have seen already, we have changed our name and our brand. Formerly Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, now Greater Hartford Gives Foundation. Me and my colleague Tracy, who you'll see here on the screen as well, we are part of the Nonprofit Support Program, which is a capacity building arm of the foundation. We support organizations with any sort of capacity building, organizational strengthening needs. And one of them is sort of providing these learning opportunities for you all around all different types of nonprofit management topics. And so we're really proud of this partnership that we have with the Hartford Library to offer you a series of workshops that really get to sort of the root of how to make your nonprofit strong and resilient. And we wanted to start off the year really kicking off with budgeting as a way to sort of promote you all to like plan for your year, plan your budgets, so that it can support your operations, can support your fundraising. And so we are looking forward to the presentation today, working with Jennifer and the Hartford Library. We encourage you all to share the recording and the materials that we'll send you as a follow-up with your board members, with your key stakeholders, and we'll also include all of the information at the Greater Hartford Gives website. The website, just a quick note, is still in transition, right? And so, as you can imagine, transitioning a whole sort of website with all of the documents, there's still a little bit, some things are missing, some things are hard to get to. But as soon as we have everything ready, we'll obviously share that with you as well. But again, in your follow up email, you'll get instructions on how to access the recording, access the materials that will be talked about today. So with that, thank you all for joining again, and I will pass it either back to you, Jessica, or to you, Jennifer.
I think Jennifer, if you want to start.
Awesome, will do. Thank you so much. Thanks, Lucas and Tracy and Jessica. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. I'm so excited to talk budgeting with all of you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and then I will get started. All right, maybe. Hold on. It worked a moment ago. Okay, here we go. Shares. Okay. Okay, can everyone see that? So far, so good? It's there. Okay, wonderful. All right, I am Jen Hockenhall, and I am a CPA licensed in the state of Washington. I just have to caveat that I'm not licensed in the state of Connecticut just yet, but I am here as just someone presenting information to you on budgeting, and I just need to disclose that I am a CPA, but I am not your CPA, so please just don't take this as any kind of legal advice. Definitely talk to your accountant about your specific needs, but I hope that you walk away here today feeling a little bit smarter and feeling like you're ready to take on your budget. But just know that I am here. I know that the folks at the Greater Hartford Gives Foundation are around, and also rely on your other nonprofit professionals. We're all kind of in this together, learning and growing every day as nonprofit professionals. So just know that you are not alone. So our learning objectives today, well, I hope when you walk away, you'll have a better understanding of why organizations need to prepare an annual realistic budget. And you'll hear me say the word realistic many times today. I find that to be a very important word when we talk about budgets. Your steps to prepare a budget, some strategies to consider when you're preparing your budget, how to obtain approval on your budget from your board, and then how to monitor your budget. So why the heck do you even need a budget? I actually recently had a very deep conversation with somebody about the importance of a budget where he thought budgets were not important. And I think that they are like one of the most important things that we can do as professionals. So there are people out there that will tell you they are not important, but I hope that when you walk away from here today, you'll have some information about why you think they're important as well. First of all, a budget is an organization's annual financial plan that translates organizational goals and objectives into dollars. So when somebody looks at your budget, they should be able to see, based on where you put your money, what is most important to your organization. So, in other words, if you are, say, a homeless center, but your number one cost, right, is related to, not the actual center itself, but to food or something else, right? Something that's not your very core objective, then you might want to rethink where you're putting your dollars or your mission. Um, so it allows those outside of management to understand your priorities. Often it's just a requirement for grant submission, and it's also a roadmap for your upcoming year. And I also want to note that they're not meant to be exact, right? So when you're planning your budget, don't get lost in the, the dollars and cents, right? Make sure that you're looking at it more big picture and know that it's not going to be exact, and there will probably be mid-year changes required. But that's okay. So this is just a budgeting checklist. If you have never done a budget before or you're fairly new to it, this is just kind of some steps to consider as you're going through your budget process. And then we'll get into each of these individually. But the first thing you want to do is determine a timeline. And then you want to agree on goals with your board and management. So a lot of these things that you do with budgeting, I would always include a board member of some sort in those conversations. You want to understand your current financial status, agree on a budget approach. Then you want to develop expense budgets and income budgets, a draft. You want to review the draft budget, approve the budget, document any decisions you made, and then implement the budget. And so we'll go through all of these individually. So the first thing I do every year is I put together a budget calendar. And this is really, it's based on your needs as an organization. It's based on your board. What does your board expect? And it really just kind of is a roadmap so that everybody's on the same page. So at least 2 to 3 months before adoption of your budget. So assume that you have a June 30th year end. So at least 2 to 3 months before, you want to have an initial discussion with your governing body. So that could be the whole board, that could be your executive team, that could be the board chair, it could be your treasurer, whomever you want someone on your governing body to really have that initial discussion. So what does everybody expect next year? Is there an expectation that it's a balanced budget? Is there an expectation that you have a surplus at the end of the year? Is there an expectation that you're adding 5 more programs next year? You're going to have 6 galas, right? Like the thing I really stress that you want to have those initial conversations with your governing body before you even start this budget process, because there's nothing worse than spending all this time putting something together just to get to your board. And they're like, wait a minute, we didn't want to do any of that stuff. Go back to the drawing board. So that's why I think having those conversations early on is really important. And then once you have that discussion with the governing body, bring that information back to your management and leadership team. And then start on a draft revenue and expense estimates. About a month or two before adoption, you're going to want to present a high-level summary of the budget to your finance committee or your whole board or your executive committee, again, however your board works. And then revisit that feedback with management. And then hopefully about a month or, a couple weeks before the start of your new year, hopefully you get to go to your board and get your budget approved so that you get to start that July 1st date or that January 1st date with your approved roadmap and you're off and running. The last thing you really want to do is still not have that budget and still not quite have that roadmap ready as you're running down that road. So definitely try to get that approved by your governing body as soon as you can. And some of the information that Tracy will share, there's just a spreadsheet that she'll share, and it's got a couple different tabs on it. And one of the tabs is a draft budget calendar. And I put two different ones in there. One assumes that it's a fiscal year end, and one assumes it's a 12/31 year end. So they're just my dates that I estimated, but just something for you to use, just a tool to help get you started if you don't have a budget calendar. Another thing that I really, really like to do is have a budget brief or a budget summary for not only for your board and for your staff, but for you. If you're the one preparing this budget and you have got people throwing stuff at you, we want 6% raises, we want no raises, we want 10 people, we want, we're going to take five people away, we're going to add this program, not this program. I love to keep myself some notes, and those notes really turn into the summary so that I know the version of the budget I'm looking at includes these high level changes, right? We've got two new positions this year. We had 6% increases. We're assuming that there's a grant coming in, but maybe it's known, maybe it's not known. But I think that this budget summary that I always put on the top of my budget packet for whomever is looking at it, we are all on the same page of differences from last year or things that we really want to highlight for the upcoming year. And then that way, when you're 6 months into the year and somebody say, wait a minute, did we even budget for that grant? It's really easy to just go back to your summary to really remember what's in that document. And I know people will throw things at you. Everyone throws things at you, right? You've got information from the board coming in. You've got information from your leadership team. You've got some staff members that want some things. So really keeping a tight summary for yourself and everyone else truly has helped me. I've done it without it, and it's kind of a nightmare. So just a recommendation. So what kind of budget strategies might you consider? When I started doing budgeting, I was always just told that it should always be balanced, right? You should always have a balanced budget, which means what you spend is what you're bringing in. I'm, wiser as I've gotten older and I've spent more time in this space, and I'm now realizing that there are absolutely times when you should have a surplus budget or a deficit budget as well. So a surplus budget means that you have brought in more money, that you're bringing in more money than you're going to spend. When might that be something that you want to do? I think that that is a great strategy if you're trying to save for a project that might happen later on, right? Maybe in a few years, you really want to add two new programs that you won't have grant funding for, but you hope to bring in money this year. So that would mean that you're going to bring in more money this year and then you're going to spend it in another year. Well, that would be when you have a deficit budget, right? So if you've brought in lots of money in 2026, but you know that money is going to be used in 27 and 28. 27 and 28 might have a deficit budget, but that's because you've brought in that money in a previous year. Um, I would also say one thing that I have personally, right, that I'm struggling with on budgeting is, do you do budgeting on a cash basis or do you do budget on an accrual basis? And this is, for me, an age-old question, and I think I go back and forth every time I do a budget because it's as as accountants, a lot of us are accountants on the line, you have to present your financial statements on an accrual basis. But if I just did my cash or if I just did my budget on a cash basis, when I do a budget to actual comparison on my financial statements, they just don't match up because my cash basis financial statements show I brought in all this cash, but my financial statements show, well, yeah, but because we're a nonprofit, we have to record revenue when we're told we're going to get it, not when we get it, but we don't want to spend it until we actually get it. So I don't expect anybody to walk away remembering, those specifics, but I just say that to say, when you make your decision, right, if you're going to do a balanced budget or a surplus budget or a deficit budget, and also, if you're doing a cash basis budget versus an accrual basis budget, you just want to be sure that everyone on your team is on the same page. So if you do a cash basis budget, but then you go and compare that cash basis budget to your financial statements, they won't quite line up. So you just want to be sure that you understand why that is. And then you want to be able to be sure that your board understands that as well, because they might want to know, well, why do I have a loss if we showed that we were going to have income on our budget? So that's very complicated, and I find it very confusing, and it's hard to just kind of talk about in an abstract on this call here. But if you go to do your budget and you've got any questions, I can absolutely be a resource to talk through kind of how to have those conversations around town. I see that I have raised my own hand because I move my hands too much. It's very distracting. I'm so sorry. Okay. Can't figure out how to put it down. I'm not actually raising my hand. Um, and then there are different methods to consider when you do budgeting. So you can have a zero-based budget where basically you go to your departments and you say, what budget do you want? We're starting from zero, starting from scratch. That to me is the most overwhelming and terrifying kind of a budget because you're not really giving anybody a base to go from. But also, sometimes you just want to scrap everything and start fresh. Let's look at this with fresh eyes, and do something different. So that might be when you would just do a zero-based budgeting, which is just starting from scratch. You might want to do an income-based budget where you take your income and then you allocate that income and then tell folks, you can spend $100,000 on your program because that's what we're bringing in. Tell me how you're going to spend it. Or you can just start with last year's, what you spent in the last year, and then start your budget from there. So different methods, different ways to look at it. Um, but you've got options. And then there's different types of budgets. Oftentimes, you'll actually do both of these budgets. So a line item budget means that you just have, right, one column and you have line items for everything. So you've got your office supplies, your personnel, your occupancy cost, all of your revenue, right, just in lines. So line item budget. And then you can have your program-based and project-based budgets. And these are most often needed for your grant proposals. So you want to effectively, you take your line item budget, right? So you've decided that you're going to spend $1,000 on office supplies, but now you're going to say, I'm going to spend the $250 on project A. I'm going to spend $250 on project B. So that's where you're taking your line item budget and now you're making it into different columns for your different projects or programs. And then capital budgets. So that would be if you are saving money to, add on to a building, or if you're saving to add more fleet vehicles or things like that. So capital budgets are when you put aside money and then you budget for oftentimes larger ticket items or your capital or your assets. And then there's always the multi-year budgeting. And I don't know about all the other folks on the call, but multi-year budgeting feels almost impossible sometimes because sometimes just like I just got to get through the year. How can I think about 2 years out when I don't even know what next year looks like? So that I think multi-year budgeting is really important, especially if you're trying to make those decisions around if a deficit budget is okay or if you have to have a surplus budget. But also, I understand, right, that multi-year budgeting can just sometimes feel like a pie in the sky. But thinking about your years out, right, if this year looks like we're going to have a deficit, what are we going to do 2 years out to make sure that we're making up for that? So there's definitely a need for multi-year budgeting. But sometimes you just got to get through the year you're in, and that's okay too. So I'm going to pause there for a second and see if there's any questions so far. Yep. All right. Seeing none, I will go ahead and continue. All right. So first, we're going to talk about your revenue budget. So what kind of revenue do your organizations bring in? Oftentimes you'll have government grants, and just a note on that, if you get government grants, those might have audit implications. So be sure that as you're accepting these government grants that you're talking to your accountant so that they know what government grants you have to see if an audit might be needed the next year. You could have industry grants, event income, such as ticket sales, sponsorships, auction income. You've got individual and corporate giving. Sometimes people like to delineate board member giving, fees for services, income earned, investment income, in-kind donations, and sometimes you'll have even endowment funding. So I listed these out here. A lot of times these are really great categories to break things into because it really kind of lines up with your 990 that you might have to do at the end of the year. So it is great to track things this way. You can also, expand that. You can make your individual giving and corporate giving into different, different industries, and different categories as well. But this is a helpful way to break it out. Yes, Lucas.
Jennifer, sorry to interrupt. The slide didn't change, so we're still on the
Ah,
question
I'm so
slide.
sorry. I'm
No
so
worries.
sorry. Changed my mind. I'm so sorry.
There you
Thank you for
go.
letting me know. All right, so here's a visual of what I just said. And you'll have the slides, but this is kind of a way to think about if you're setting up, you're setting up new accounts in your system, some ideas and ways to list out your revenue. And then how do you estimate future revenue? I cannot emphasize enough to be realistic. It's amazing to have that pie in the sky. We hope we're going to have $5 million in revenue next year, and we hope and therefore it will happen. But which I would caution you against. But also, you don't want to underestimate your budget if you can. So it's because then you might limit yourself from doing things that you might have done had you gotten the income and then you got the income, right? So just be realistic. How I typically do it, right, is I'll use my year-to-date actuals, figure out where I'm at as of when I start the budget, and then I project out the last, 3 months of the year, 2 months of the year, and just really use those prior year results as a guide. And sometimes that's hard, right? We're in a weird environment right now. Are our donors going to keep donating to us? Who the heck knows? We've got more political seasons coming on. Are people going to give to that instead of to us as nonprofits? There are a lot of challenges, I think, in nonprofit budgeting, and estimating revenue, I think, is one of the biggest ones. You might want to reach out to your major donors and funders and just say, hey, I'm working on my budget. Do you have any ideas of what it might look like next year? What's the cycle? What should we be thinking about for next year? Some funders won't tell you, but some of them might give you an idea of what to consider for the following year, which would be helpful. You want to review your outstanding grant applications. Does it look like we're actually going to get the grants this year? And then will we get it next year? But definitely reviewing your outstanding grant applications. And then take into account any other factors that might change your future funding sources. Do you have a funder right now who's looking at, the projects that they're funding? Maybe they used to fund homeless centers, but next year they're all about food access or something like that. So, really kind of understanding your funders and what they're really looking for is really helpful when you go to estimate your revenues. And then, same with your program budget revenues. So, will you be getting other grants to fund programs? Are you going to get earned income, right? Are you going to start charging for some of your services? Definitely remember to put that in if you are, or take it out if your plan is to no longer charge for your services. And will you be receiving any industry sponsorships for your programs? So these are all things to really think about when you're just looking at your programs individually and how to allocate those revenues to your various projects that are coming up. And again, in that worksheet that Tracy shared with you, there's a tab in there for some income projections that you can use. I literally this morning was in QuickBooks and was trying to enter my own budget, and I found some new tips and things that they have in QuickBooks that you can use, so that you can start projecting your income and projecting your expenses as well. So this is a tool. QuickBooks has tools, lots of different tools out there that you can use, but at least it gives you a start if you're doing this for the very first time. And then here's what it might look like from a program based, right? So you've got your grants, your total, and then where do those grants go? Program 1, 2, 3, any fundraising, any administrative revenues. So it just kind of breaks it out so that your program team has an idea of what their revenues might be that they can spend. All right, that was pretty quick on revenue. Are there any questions on revenue? Moving right along. All right, expenses. So what types of expenses does your organization have that you might have to budget for? From what I see, from where I've been, I think salaries, benefits are always the number one cost of most nonprofits. Staff development is very important. You can have direct program costs. So direct program costs would be costs that only occur if your program occurs. Sorry. So, you would only have rent for the pavilions if your summer program happens. And if your summer program doesn't happen, then you don't have to rent those pavilions. So that would be the direct program costs. You've got your rent and other occupancy costs, so utilities, copier leases, those kind of things, travel, fundraising expenses, accounting, legal, other professional services, all the insurances that might be out there that you might have as a professional nonprofit. So these just are, some examples of expenditures that you might have as an organization. So then how do you estimate for the next year? I actually find expenditures far easier to budget for than revenue in a nonprofit because at least I have some control over, right, the leases that I enter into, the space that I rent, the things that I spend basically is really up to us as the nonprofits. It's the money that comes in that's harder, I think, to figure out. So again, similar to what we did with the revenue, I would look year to date actuals and then prior year results to figure out what my expenses might be. Assume any across the board salary increases, benefit increases. I actually reach out to my health insurance provider months in advance every year to ask them, what are you seeing? Because I find that's one of those it could swing wildly, right? Like it could be a 3% increase, it could be a 30% increase. But they usually have a general sense, I think, a couple months out, so that you can start plugging that in because that's often a very large number for your organization. Along the lines of the salaries, attrition, right? Are you going to have any staff turnover? Are you an organization that has people turning in and out? It's the nonprofit space. I think a lot of folks, don't stick around a long time. Um, so you could do some savings for attrition if that's something that you see every year. So by that I mean if my staff accountant is here today, but they put in their notice and then I don't, hire another staff accountant for 6 months, if it takes me a really long time to hire these positions, my attrition savings would be what I didn't spend on that position from when they left to when we refilled the position. I've seen between 1% and 3% is often something that I've plugged into budgets just based on what I have seen, but other organizations, just I would look and see again historically what you've seen and then factor that in if that's something that's helpful to you. And then also, don't forget your leases, anything that's contracted. Those are always things that you want to make sure that you're not missing. And then related directly to your projects, you want to, one thing that I have found, right, are these grant funded projects. When we receive grant funding in one year to spend in the next year, sometimes folks forget that, oh shoot, I forgot to budget for the entire project because we've been talking about it all last year and we got the revenue, and then they forget to budget for the expenditures in the next year. So I would most certainly go back to my revenue from the prior year and make sure that any grant funded projects that need to be paid for in the next year are included in that expenditure budget in the next year. Make sure that you include estimated increases for things. Audits aren't getting any cheaper, insurance isn't getting any cheaper, professional services. So make sure that you're building in some kind of increase for a lot of these things. Sometimes when I do my initial pass and my expense budget, I will just say 10% increase, right? Especially for professional services. But if historically you've seen only a 3% increase, then maybe just plug in the 3% increase. But when I'm doing my initial expenditure budget, I almost always put in an increase because nothing's going down in price. But then I'll note that too, right? That I put a 10% increase for all of my professional services, 3% for all of my supply services, just so that I know that in my initial pass that what I did for my increases so I can share that with management. And then also, it's easy to go in sometimes if you put formulas in your budgets to just change it, right? Like the CEO might say, hey, I don't think we should do 10% based on what I've heard. I think it's only 7. So you can just change the 10 to a 7, and then your budget just kind of updates, your expenditures update. So it is just a way that I keep myself straight on what increases that I've put in, and then it makes it easy to toggle if you need to make changes. For some bigger things, you might want to obtain quotes early. Best practices that I've seen are, getting 3 quotes from 3 different vendors. And note, you don't always have to go with the lowest quote. You want to go with the person who's going to do the best job at a reasonable price, but at least you'll have an idea of what you might pay for that service in the coming year, so you can plug that into your expenditure budget. And then personnel and expenditure allocations. Basically, anything that looks like an embedded Excel spreadsheet in here is a tab in the spreadsheet that Tracy sent out. So personnel expenses, like I said earlier, are usually the largest line item in the budget. You want to consider when you go to do your personnel expenditures, any required contractual increases, right? So maybe you have unions, maybe it's industry standard that you look at, or cost of living, or whatever, but be sure that you are considering any required and other types of increases that you should be giving to employees for the next year. We talked about our benefit increases already. You might want to consider the attrition savings line if you have significant turnover. And then consider budgeting for full benefit costs. So this one I always go back and forth on, right? If I've got 25 employees, but today only 15 of them are taking health insurance, technically, if all 25 people stay and only 15 folks are on health insurance, my savings might be those 10 people who aren't taking health insurance. But there's always, those 10 people might leave, and the 10 people that you backfill those positions with, they might all take health insurance next year. Or they might not have health insurance that they had, and now they have to go on your health insurance. So I've often seen folks just budget for what's going on this year, to not have to budget, right? Like, I mean, health insurance is wildly expensive. So the difference between someone taking and not taking health insurance could be a savings of $15,000 to your organization, and that is a large number. Um, this is one of those things that I would talk with management about, maybe talk to your broker about. Make a note for the board on what you chose to do, because maybe you did choose to only budget for those 15 people that were taking health insurance, but you all need to understand, if more people get on health insurance, you're going to have those expenses that are unbudgeted, and how are you going to offset that, right? If 2 people join, you got $30,000 more in expenses next year. Where's that going to come from? So just a word of warning on that one, because I've definitely fallen into that trap. And then program budgets. Again, that be realistic. Know who will be working on the program. So you're going to want to take your list of employees and their costs and allocate them to your programs based on the percentage of time that each person will be working on that program, and include the salary and benefit cost. So that's not to say, right, that Jane is a daycare worker and all she does is she does the daycare program. And that's great. She's easy. 100% of Jane's time goes to that program. But me, for instance, right, as your director of finance, where do you put my time? So that's where you really want folks to it doesn't need to be, this is an art, not a science, right? So you just want to be able to justify the cost that you're charging to your programs. So if I am the finance director, but I spend 50% of my time on one program because I have to do the billing, I have to do the reporting on the grant, I'm paying the bills for the grant, right? Like, this is like your biggest grant. I very well could maybe justify 50% of my time goes to a program. Not likely, but there is definitely opportunities to have those conversations to see how much of everybody's time should be allocated to the different programs. One thing I would caution as well is, when you're looking at this every year, I don't necessarily know that you want to change these numbers in a large way each year, because it'll be really, really hard if one year I say, heck yeah, I'm spending 75% of my time on that project. And then next year I'm like, oh no, I don't spend any time on that grant. And all of a sudden you went from allocating, $50,000 to the program to zero. but now you want to compare year over year, your year over year comparisons will get a little bit wacky. So I think making sure that the first time you do these cost allocations, they're really solid, and then tweaking them year over year instead of just making like wide changes every year is definitely something to consider. Not to say you shouldn't change them. If they're wrong, and definitely you should change them. But when you go to compare year over year, you want to do your best to make sure that they are comparable so you can figure out what's going on. Again, just for your program budgets, right? What supplies will you need for the program? What outside consultants might be required for your program? So these will all be things that will fall under, program one, program two, program three. And then what indirect costs might be allowed based on your grant application, right? You might just have 10% you can allocate indirect costs to your programs or not, right? Or maybe there is no indirect and it's simply what you spend is what you get back. But, check your grant applications before you really go through and finalize your budget just to make sure you've got things in the right column and things are feeling that they're being allocated appropriate. And so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but there are direct costs versus indirect costs. And we talked a little bit about this already today, but I think indirect costs are really more of your overhead. So oftentimes your accountant, maybe your director of operations, those kind of things are often considered indirect cost or your IT cost or rent or insurance. So things often I consider indirect costs things that you would bet you'd probably be paying for if you had program A, B, or C. But you still need an accountant regardless how many programs that you have versus a direct cost. So your direct costs are really easily identifiable. If my program goes away tomorrow, so do all of those costs. So direct supplies, salary for a program manager, rent for a daycare center, right? Things that you're paying for directly and those will often then become the things that are in column for project number one. So just things to think about as you're putting together your budget. And then this again is in your packet, but it really talks through, you'll have your total here, and then you've got program one, two, three, what relates to admin, what relates to fundraising. So this just kind of gives you a start in an Excel format on how to start your budget. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a second. Any questions on expenditures?
Hey, Jennifer, we have a couple of questions. There's been some
Great.
discussion on the chat, and I love to see other, folks supporting one another and asking questions of one another. So there's two questions. One was sent to me privately, but they tend to deal with like startups and small organizations. So I'm going to share them with you. So Barbara is asking, are there startup funding sources for specific grant opportunities that can help cover initial costs like hiring a CPA or setting up financial systems for a nonprofit? And the second question, shared with me privately, do you have any tips or guidance for volunteer organizations that are looking to hire their first staff person in terms of budgeting for them?
Can you say that one more time?
Do you have any tips or guidance for volunteer organizations that are looking to hire their first staff person? How to budget for it?
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Great questions. Yeah. So the startups, so congratulations on starting a brand new organization. I know that is incredibly challenging. And also I know that Greater Hartford Gives Foundation has a lot of really great opportunities for you. I do know that, one thing that I have helped organizations with, one who's on the line right now, starting to set up like QuickBooks and that kind of thing. So definitely work with Lucas and his group on at least, from the accounting standpoint, right? And one thing I would also say is, give a plug to TechSoup here. TechSoup is a really great organization that offers really low cost technology for nonprofit organizations if you sign up for it. And that includes getting QuickBooks for $80 a year. And QuickBooks is, for me, it's a godsend. It's what I use for every organization that I'm involved with right now. and it has so many fantastic features. So getting that set up from the ground up, I'm happy to help with that. I'm sure Lucas has other folks that are happy to help with that, but definitely setting yourself up for success by getting somebody to help you from the start, I think is probably very important because it's easier to start the right way than to unwind things if they're set up not quite correctly. I don't know about other grants that help with those kind of things. Lucas, do you know of other grants that are out there for new organizations?
It's always it's a little tricky, and I appreciate someone who made a comment on the chat as well that it's as a startup, right? And you're starting off, it's nearly impossible to find a grant, right? For your work. I would definitely say reach out to Greater Hartford Gives. And I don't know any sort of grant specifically for CPAs or any financial systems. TechSoup is great. I know folks are also putting other links on the chat. I would say also like just a quick Google search, around grants for financial sort of systems, I think would can provide some leads. But definitely feel free to reach out to us for a conversation.
I'd like to
Thanks.
add one more resource that might be helpful, Catch a Fire, which can be utilized through our organization. Does offer some volunteers that can help with financial system setup, expense tracking setup, and things like that. So another option people can look into.
Thanks, Tracy. I haven't heard of that one before. That's great. And then to the question about hiring your first employee, that is a great question. And I think that that is one where working directly with your board to get consensus around what employee do you need, right? Are you looking for a, director, somebody who's just a one-person shop who's the director and also working with the board and other volunteers, and how much will you be paying them? And I think first you got to figure out your revenue before you can figure out, I think, how much you will be able to pay the new person that you're bringing on board. And, kind of back to our slide about the cost, don't just, don't get lost in the, well, their salary will be $50,000 a year, so I only need to cover the 50,000. Don't forget there's payroll taxes, there's benefits, there's insurance that goes along with having employees and that kind of thing. So that $50,000 employee could very easily become a 75, 80, $90,000 employee. So just be sure that you know all the costs to that employee before you start looking for someone. But definitely working with your board to make sure that everybody's on the same page with how much money you'll be um, bringing in as well. And if you're bringing in somebody for a grant funded project, making sure that it's very clear to that new employee that their role is based upon grant funding too, just so that everybody's on the same page going into it. Because if that grant goes away, unless you have other funding set aside for it, that position might go away. So I think I will just always go back to make sure you're working with your board or trusted folks on the board. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be at a board meeting or something like that, but, work with your board chair and make sure that everybody's really on the same page, understands the real costs, and then understands how you're going to pay for it. There are some really great places to post for those jobs. And I am Oh my gosh, I had it in my head and I've lost it. There are other great ones outside of just Indeed where you can post very specific nonprofit jobs. Um, and maybe it will come to me before the end of today, I'm sure. It will come to me and then I will share that information. But if you just Google job postings for nonprofit positions, I'm sure it will pop up as well. So I hope that answered that question. If not, ask more and I will go back to that. So. All right, seeing no other hands raised, I will continue. So next thing you want to do, right? So you've got your revenue, you've got your expenses, you're feeling really good about where things are. The next thing you want to do is share your budget with the board. So once you have this draft budget, you want the board to have the opportunity to evaluate it and then give you feedback. And this is not on June 30th when you're not, when your year end starts on July 1st. Definitely make sure you're having these conversations beforehand. And then I would start with revenues by category. So it doesn't have to be right under individual giving. You don't have to show them that you've got monthly donors and um, donor just individuals and then large donors or however you want to do it. It doesn't have to be really broken out. You can do a more summarized version for the board. And the same with the expenditures. And then you could also consider sharing this information by program if that's helpful to the board. Sometimes more is just more, and boards sometimes it's too much information and then they get lost in the numbers and they'll start asking you, but why are you budgeting $10 for office supplies for this one little program instead of really focusing on the larger picture of we want to have 5 programs next year and this is how we think we're going to fund it. So and it's not to say that you're hiding things from the board. It's just you're keeping your board very focused on the bigger picture budget. You want to request feedback from your board and then make sure that you're allowing yourself and your team time to make those adjustments. And then you want to end it with the final approval from the board. And there might be years where you're going to your board 3, 4, 5 times before they come and approve your budget. And that is okay. I think that healthy conversation really means that your board is engaged and that your staff is like really going back and trying to make those adjustments so that everybody feels at the end of the day that this budget is the roadmap for your team and also sharing with the greater public, right, what your organization is really about. So I know sometimes it can get really frustrating when you're working on this budget, you're given the 6th budget presentation of the year, but also it's really a good thing if you've gotten engaged, I think, personally. So now my budget's done. My board approved it. I am ready to start my year off. So what do I do next? One thing I would recommend is entering that budget into your financial software. So if it's QuickBooks, if it's something else, if it's Excel, right, wherever it is, just make sure that your budget is readily available to you, to your team. I would share it with your team as well. If you've just done some program budgets, make sure that all of those folks that are in charge of those programs have that budget handy. Another really great thing to do is to take that budget and make it a monthly budget. And I don't mean just take it, divide it by 12, and then say, here you go, but really look back at what you've done over the last couple of years and try to figure out when that money will be spent on a monthly basis. Because then you can take it and you can really compare those results to what you're actually seeing. Because if you're looking at that in January and then you look at it in February, right, and you're looking at it on a monthly basis, you're going to catch things way quicker than if you're only looking at this comparison every 6 months. So if you get to the end of June and you realize that your program team has already spent 95% of their budget on supplies and we still have half the year to go, that is not the best time to figure that out. It is better than figuring it out in November. But watching it month to month and really letting your team see how things are going month to month is really a great way to go. I was saying earlier, right, I was in QuickBooks today doing my budget or entering the 2026 budget. And they have a really cool feature where you can actually just go in there and click a button and say that you want this year's budget to look like what last year actually ended up. And it populated by month. Like it really went in there and populated, and it said, you spent $500 in January and you spent $10,000 in February, by line, by class, like by program. So it's a really great, like I said, I was blown away. I was super excited. I got to talk to you all today so I could share with you something that I learned today. But it really does allow you to do a better budgeting process and better planning for you and your staff. And then, you might find mid-year that, your team spent all their budget, but it was because they actually really needed to spend their budget. So we need to make some revisions and figure out how we're going to do it, what we're going to pull from, what we're going to not do. Maybe we've got a ton of more revenue, right? And now we can spend more money. So these mid-course corrections they oftentimes do happen. And I would look at my bylaws to make sure that I'm going about my revisions the right way, right? So your bylaws might just be that your board really just approves your big revenue number, your big expense number, and whatever you do in between, kind of up to you. Some bylaws will say we approved a line item budget and you can't go over or under your budgets, right? So make sure that you understand what your organization's requirements are. And don't be afraid to make course corrections. I think that's the biggest takeaway. If that's the thing you take away from this is don't be afraid to go back to your board and say, oh, we have this problem or we have a great problem, right? We got more money. But those open conversations, those sharing of these, year-to-date comparisons with your actuals to your budget with your board is really important as well. Just that transparency to make sure that there's no surprises. Because a surprise in December is a really terrible time to have a surprise, right? So have those conversations every month or every quarter just to make sure that everybody's on track. We just talked about monitoring your results. And then when you budget for a grant funded project, just remember that even if you spend more on your grant funded project, doesn't mean your funder is going to come back and give you more money. Even if you do have a mid-year course correction that you need from your board, it doesn't mean that your funder will give you more. Doesn't mean they won't, but always keep that in mind. And then always remember that your expenditures related to grants and tracking within your financial system is really, really important. There are a lot of different ways that you can go about tracking that in the financial system so that you can easily report that and then compare it to your budget. You can do it by class, you can do it by customer, you can do it by tags. I actually learned from a nonprofit person who came to me with some questions about tags and I had never heard of them and he was talking about it and I Googled what are tags in QuickBooks, and they're real it's a really great feature. So I know there's some people that don't have great things to say about QuickBooks, but I can't say enough great things about QuickBooks and all of its tools, and to be able to spend $80 a year as a nonprofit, it is an absolute bargain and I would highly recommend it. So this is an Excel version of a budget to actual comparison. If you, though, enter your budgets into QuickBooks, QuickBooks does this report for you. So that's just one of the many reasons to enter your budgets in QuickBooks, because this is something that easily happens. It's literally a click of a button if you've put your information in correctly. But if you just want to use an Excel spreadsheet as well, this is a great kind of the template to consider as you're doing that. So what do you do? I think we talked a little bit about this already. I got ahead of myself, but if your expenses are exceeding your budget, right? Go to your bylaws. Look at how your board approved your budget. Sometimes it might be in the resolution too, or in your board minutes that said how they approved it. And if you're monitoring your budget monthly, right, we're going to be able to catch those overages. And don't be afraid to raise the flag too, right? I mean, we've got folks from all across the board on our call today. So some of you might be that accountant who's like really looking at these numbers and scratching your head and wondering like, why are we spending so much? What's going on? Raise your hands, definitely ask those questions. Especially in the accounting world, we see so many things. And I think often, at least this is me just speaking for myself, I will often sit there and think like, what do I know? I'm just the accountant, right? I'm not the person in the program. I'm sure that they know what they're doing, doing this or that. Oftentimes people don't get it, right? They're not seeing what we're seeing as accountants. So raising your hand, raising that flag, and if you're still uncomfortable, keep raising it, right? Don't just sit back and just think, yeah, at the end of the year it'll all work out. It'll all work out. So yeah, I am encouraging you to definitely ask those questions whenever you have them. And then again, I can't state it enough that open communication with your board is just so, so important. And it doesn't matter if you're an organization with a $10,000 budget or, a city government with a $600,000 budget. It's really important to communicate with those who are governing your organization. One of my favorite things that I ever did was I found that when I was doing my budget every year in October, I would sit in, public meetings and get yelled at by the public about not being transparent enough and not having enough open meetings and this and that. So I decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start in May or in March, and I'm going to have a conversation with the public, right? Whoever that might be, if it's your, maybe it's your constituents, maybe it's the people that you serve, but I need everybody to understand before I start that budget process what the heck a budget is, where our money comes from, and how we spend it, and then really talk about that small portion that really is kind of discretionary. But I found that having those conversations so early on in the process with those that were approving the budget, with those that were benefiting from the budget, right? So that everybody understood it from the onset. When we went to pass that budget in October, phew, there's always the one guy who's going to show up and still complain. But I will say that because we had those conversations open or early and often, when we got to the end of the budget, there wasn't all of these changes that we had to look at for the end of the year because we've been having those conversations for 6 months. So I know it's challenging and sometimes it's hard to have those conversations and it's daunting and you've got to have the conversation with 15 different people, but making sure that people are being heard, it will really, really help you when you're trying to get a budget passed, regardless of the size of your organization. All right. I talked maybe too fast, and I think last time I did this presentation, there were a lot more questions. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if there's any more questions.
Jennifer, we have a couple questions on
Okay.
the chat and someone who would like to ask their questions live. So the first question on the chat, what is the best budget software? Can Excel handle small business or small org needs, or is it QuickBooks?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will say that for all the small nonprofits that I've worked with and for, I've still used Excel. I won't say Excel is the best, but I will say it does the job. The one thing with those Excel documents, though, is you want to make sure everything's linked and it's linked right, and tab A agrees to tab B and everything's flowing properly. So I think oftentimes that is the scary part, especially when you have a fairly complicated organization. Um, there are tools within QuickBooks. Like I said, I'm still learning how to use those, but there are definitely tools within QuickBooks that you can use. I don't actually, I wish if somebody knows of some really great ones, I would love for folks to share that because I don't know them and I would love to consider something else going forward for some of my organizations. But that's my short answer to that. But if you see anything in the chat that says otherwise, Lucas, please do let me know.
That's good. The next question, should board of directors get monthly budget and uh, uh, be apprised if organization is on track with spending?
I think so. I absolutely think that that's the best way to go. All the organizations that I work with, I share monthly financial statements with the full board, and it always has it's like a whole package, right? So you'll have your balance sheet, you'll have your income statement, and then I also have a budget to actual comparisons. And a lot of times I'll have um, year to year comparisons, kind of depending on how last year went, right? If this year is completely different from last year, then adding those kind of reports isn't quite helpful. But working with either your finance committee or your board chair to figure out what the most meaningful reports are for them and then providing them, I would say at least quarterly. I know sometimes doing it monthly might be a challenge, but at least quarterly, but monthly really is the ideal, I think, for a board. And as a board member, I like to see them monthly as well.
Great. And Lucinda, I know you wanted to ask your question live, so feel free.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know how to put this in the chat. So, and I'm a relatively still, I consider myself still a new nonprofit, had a very small budget, and then now we started receiving grants, so it's a little bit larger. But I've always been on the fiscal year from January to December. But then I recently received a grant that wants a July to June. And I'm just like, I created something, but I'm just like, and I do everything. I have QuickBooks, but I still like to do a lot of things by hand because I don't trust I don't trust the system. And that's my own issues. But I'm just wondering, like, what do I do when that happens? Because I feel like January to December is easier for me, but I had to adjust for that July to June for this, grant so they know how how I'm projected to spend this money.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Lucinda. And I think a lot of times, there are people that will change their year ends for grant purposes and things like that. And that's like a whole IRS process, and it's not something that's unmanageable. You can absolutely do it. But if it works for you to continue to be a January through December and it's just for reporting purposes, if you use QuickBooks, I promise it's really great. You can trust it, I promise. But I also export stuff from QuickBooks and turn it into an Excel document, so I totally get it. You can absolutely run those reports through QuickBooks and just change in the dates, right? So you're still reporting to them on that July to June. It really is just a toggle within QuickBooks. And you can still export it, right? You can run reports by month through QuickBooks and then put them in Excel and do what you need to do with them as well. But there's absolutely ways to do that without having to go through the changing of your year. Yeah.
Jennifer, if I may really quickly just jump on this as a
Yeah.
funder, especially the foundation has all these different opportunities and they're all in different time cycles, right? This is where I would encourage you to share with the funder that you are operating on a calendar year and you're doing your best to share what's happening in the calendar year, but also extending to that cycle of the grant. And as you get more clarity, as you plan other years or the next year, communicating that with your funder as earlier as possible, that would also help with the building the relationship with the funder.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was helpful.
Okay. Any other questions, Lucas?
Not on the chat, but if anyone wants to jump on and ask live, go ahead. Anne?
Anne, did you have a question? Okay. That's all right. Maybe you should kind of accidentally raise your hand like I did. So, all right. Well, with that, I want to say that there are,
Sorry,
oh, I'm sorry. Hi, Anne.
I'm sorry. But I just to the comment around the challenges of moving to QuickBooks, like if you're using something else. Another benefit of using QuickBooks is when you then need to get a financial review or an audit done, it's very much easier for you to provide the working papers and things that the accountant needs. QuickBooks makes that a lot easier than you having to manually put things in a format that works for your auditors or your accountants that are doing your financial review. So that saves you money.
Yes, and headaches and headaches. Thank you for that, Anne. I appreciate it. And I will add on to what Anne said. Again, if you're using QuickBooks and you have to have an auditor or a review, or really if you're responding to funders and their requests for their year-end reports and things like that, there is a function within QuickBooks where you can drop and drag all of the files related to anything that you're entering into QuickBooks directly into QuickBooks. And then if you want to give your auditor or your accountant, accountant access to your QuickBooks file, your audit or review will be so simple because they can go in and they're not going to have to ask you a million questions because they can just click on that transaction and then they can see the grant document, right? Like if you've got the grant funding that you just got, and then you can go in there and see that grant document that's attached to your item, or even as you're preparing for your audit or your review or your tax return, all that stuff is right there in QuickBooks. It is super slick, and I think it's changed over the years. So if you started using QuickBooks a long time ago and haven't used it, and you haven't really used those updated features, like that's a really, really great one that I love. As I go to prepare for year-end audits, I'm like, I can't remember what the heck that was. I'm like, oh, cool, but I attached things, so it's good. I can find it. So definitely. another plug for QuickBooks. So thanks again, Ann. I appreciate that. So one thing that I am just one of many or individuals that come on here and do trainings for this group, and I absolutely love it. And I also love to watch the other folks that do these trainings. So I included a link here. It worked when I tried it the other day. It still goes to the other website, but I'm sure it will be updated. But definitely checking out other presentations on other topics is a really great way to continue to learn and grow as a nonprofit professional. I put my email address here. Please feel free to reach out to me with questions. I can talk budget, finances, accounting, nonprofit, whatever, all day long. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And also, connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like. My LinkedIn is there. I will say I've met so many great people through this organization. I have breakfast with folks just because, we have so many things in common. We're all just trying to do the best we can for those people in Hartford and our communities. And I think that we all really do have a special bond, even though we have never met because of the work that we do. So I would, please reach out to me and let me know if there's anything that I can be of assistance with. And with that, I'm so grateful again. Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. That was a wonderful workshop. I got so much out of that, and I'm sure everybody else did. And I want to thank everybody for coming today. And Tracy did place a link in the chat for a survey. We're always collecting information about the workshops that we do and looking for information about workshops that you may want us to offer. And there's been some great communication in the chat today about some topics that we'll definitely explore looking at 2026. Also, I just wanted to remind everyone that Hartford Public Library does have access to Candid, which is a software that helps you look at data, research tools, different grants, funders, organizations that are similar to you, maybe see what grants people are getting, and you can access that for free if you come into one of the Hartford Public Library locations. Someone at the desk can help you if you're not sure. There's instructions. And just so that you do know, the software is two different websites, but that is going to be changing in 2026. So we'll be doing another training later on in the year once that merger happens between the two. And let me see. Oh, I'm going to send out an email probably in the next few days, just a reminder that because of the changes that are going on with Greater Hartford Gives Foundation, with their website, there's specific links that will be placed in the email that will be sent to you that you can access the slides, the materials, and the recording. So if you have any questions, you can always email me, and we hope to see you at a future workshop. Thank you.